This is my BX2816. It's just a quick video of how I updated some of the bearings inside to greasable bearings. From the factory they're not greasable, and I had a bearing dry out and blow up. Blew up the sprockets. You'll see just a quick video of me zipping it apart and doing a little bit of custom bearing work to get it something that you can service instead of something you cannot grease. Kind of a quick idea more than anything. Your mileage may vary. This is what started the whole problem right here. That is supposed to look like this. That was originally in here. You can see I've upgraded to a greasable bearing. Did not fit. I had to turn it down in the lathe to make it fit. But I should be able to come in from above after the chain is back on and keep that greased. You can see these bearings here have an eccentric locking collar. See that is thicker than over here. It's eccentric, it's off center. And you can see that the locking collar is as well. It's thicker over here and thinner over here. That allows you to lock it to the shaft when you offset that. You can see that it lines up and then does not line up. So you pound it, it offsets it to the shaft and it seizes it so the shaft won't spin inside the bearing. When this one blew up, of course, that one was up in here. This is the reduction box here. This is a new unit that I bought as a replacement. I'm going to rebuild the one that broke. Obviously, this upper sprocket here lives on the shaft that comes through there. The bearing let go, and that allowed these teeth, spinning at high speeds, to mesh into that sprocket. You can see this old one here. The teeth are gone. That's what happens when that bearing lets go. It lets that shaft drop and it lets those teeth explode. You can see the factory replacement has the non-greasable bearings in this as well. And of course the original equipment had non-greasable bearings. You can see I've started customizing this one to go to a grease style bearing. Here's a replacement here. They're not direct drop-in if you don't have a lathe or a way to customize this. You're not going to get this done. You can see that the bearing is actually held through the bracket a little bit. This one's probably easier to see. You can see that the bearing actually protrudes into this a little bit. Not sure if you can see down in there, but that lock collar is directly against the lower sprocket. That's why this bearing needs to be this direction, or you won't have enough room for your locking collar because it hits your sprocket. So what I did on this one as well, this originally started out as this bearing, and I turned it down in the lathe to make it thinner, so you can see this bearing is coming through. The bearing, if I didn't turn it, you could see it's quite a bit further back. So this needs to be turned down. And I did that on this one as well. That just allows that bearing to go further that way because this is the eccentric lock collar. And then you need room for your sprocket as well. So I shortened that up in the lathe, turned it down some so it sets further back. Another thing I'm also doing too is changing the gear ratio. This is a 32 tooth, I think, and the bottom is an 11. I actually am going to be changing that sprocket to a 24 tooth sprocket. I bought some spare sprockets as well, just to continue to have enough spare parts to keep it going. So this is a factory 32 tooth sprocket. This is a 24 tooth sprocket. So what I'm going to do is obviously custom lengthen the chain. Here's another chain. Obviously smaller sprocket. It's going to take less chain. It's going to change the RPMs of the impeller, about 400 RPMs. So it should throw it a little bit further, and hopefully with the greasable bearings, and including this one when I get it put back together, we'll have a greasable bearing there and a greasable bearing there, and a new sprocket. And you can see on the factory unit down in there that sprocket is welded onto the shaft. There's no keyway. There's no keyway on this shaft, and there's no locking collars. So this sprocket is actually welded in place. I've already taken this one in the lathe. Again, if you don't have a lathe, you're not going to get that done. But I've chucked it up in the lathe, and I've cut that weld off, and I've already had the sprocket off the shaft. So I do have a new sprocket somewhere in my pile. Here it is. You can see that that is extremely small. It's the only 11 tooth sprocket I could find. Needs to be bored. So again, without a lathe, you're not going to be able to bore that out to fit on that shaft. But I'll be replacing that, and I can shorten that up a little bit too. You can see that's a little bit different design, but we can probably turn it that way, and that will fit in there. You can see I've got this bearing in backwards. This lock collar originally was out here. I just stuck it together backwards, but you can see the lock collar on the factory unit is out here. I've just got that bearing swung around, so I should be able to stick the sprocket in that way. That lock collar will be out of the way in the other direction. After I get that bored to size, I can re-weld that on there. So with the greasable bearings and the new sprocket, I'm going to put this one back into service. I'm going to keep this factory unit. I have to use my hub. That's like 300 and something bucks. That didn't get damaged. But I'm going to keep this on the shelf. Obviously, it's going to be a recurring theme to replace the chain and all that. So I'll show a couple of clips here somewhere of before and after on the bearing. I'm going to have to take probably that much off to make this work. So it's definitely custom. They should have made these greasable from the beginning. That would have made that live longer, especially this. You can see that there's absolutely nothing left of that. There's just another clip of the offset. You can see if I don't thin this pillow block down, you can see that locking collar is going to be too far out, and I'd either have to machine this down, which I don't want to do. I could turn, you know, a little bit off that and make this fit, but this thing being like 300 bucks and this thing being like 25 bucks, it makes sense to me to screw this up and leave that. Happy, but you can see the way these bearings are designed, they're a little bit thicker. This makes the bearing come out a little further this way. So if I can shorten that up, it'll be more like that, and that will give me the room I need to get my lock collar in that position. Also, these bearings that I'm putting in the reduction box, you can see they're held together on the shaft a little different. It's not eccentric, it doesn't have an offset. It's got twin locking to keep that from spinning on the shaft. So this one is actually a different part number than this, because that has the eccentric. This is held with 2 set screws. I went with the eccentric on this. Obviously there's a reason why they did that from the factory, and there's no sense for me to change that program. I'm assuming the eccentric allows this offset to bite the shaft with more force, and probably is better at holding the shaft from spinning inside, would be my guess. So I didn't want to reinvent the entire wheel and just continued going with them. Now these also, I believe, will be an easy replacement. You see that obviously is the holder for the augers inside. That's the same bolt pattern. See, I've got that all out. Obviously those bearings on the inside of this that hold your augers, there's no greaser on those either. I have taken them apart and repacked them just to keep them happy, but I think I will buy 2 more of these, and then I'll replace the bearings for the auger to actually have a grease fitting. It just makes sense to be able to keep those greased up. You know, you rinse stuff off or whatever. Yeah, that's a boo-boo. So what happens when you wear out your shroud from ingesting rocks in your snowblower? It just makes sense to be able to, after you rinse the machine out, give it a little bit of grease just to get the moisture back out of the bearings and force out any contaminants. So in the future, I'll be getting a couple more of those and do the auger. To turn this out, I don't want a bunch of cast iron powder getting in that new bearing. So these pillow blocks, they have a little gap there. You can see it's different than this side. This side is perfectly round. This side has got gaps. It allows you to pound on this and swivel the bearing out. So I'll be able to pound this bearing out. That way when I stick it in the lathe, I won't contaminate that new bearing with a bunch of crap. You can see I've got it started. See how it's partially out. Not gonna do it on camera because it's kind of hard to do anything while you're filming, but basically just keep pounding on that. You can see it's coming out. So you just work it right out, and I'm going to beat on it for a minute and show you it come out. There, edited out some swear words. You see it's coming out. Get it near those 2 cutouts. Comes right out. So that's what I'm gonna chuck in the lathe and keep my bearing happy. All right, you can see I haven't turned anything yet, but it's chucked up. We're just gonna use the lathe here and chew that up a bit. You can see how much of that I turned out. That's quite a bit thinner now, but I left enough for that to hold that bearing. That's your grease fitting hole there. Goes into that small little track. That small track lines up with this groove. See that tiny little pinhole there? That's where the grease gets into that bearing. This bearing will physically fit in backwards, but if that recess doesn't line up with that recess, it is not going to accept grease. So I was able to do that and keep enough to keep the bearing steady. You can see the original style bearing, that same dimensions. This bearing being a replacement that I purchased from Kubota just to get back going. When this thing broke, I had to do some research on what I could get for aftermarket stuff, and I actually put it back together with this for one storm. That's that video you saw me taking things apart. Everything looked good because it was. I already had replaced that. So these bearings, this bearing would physically fit in this pillow block, but it's not greasable. So that little line is what changes that. So as long as you put that back in there correctly, it'll take grease. And as long as I did this right, let's see if I pound that mess back out of there. So that one I just turned, now that what I left of it should fit in that hole, which it does. Kind of gives you something to center on. It's not critical. You just want to leave enough meat, obviously, to hold that bearing, but you can see now that that allows that to recess in there. And with that pounded back in there, that allows that bearing, instead of coming too far out and hitting on my coupler, it'll be recessed just a touch and give me room. So all that just to not have to turn that coupler down, which I'd just soon not screw that up. So now I can start putting this together here. Obviously, I'm going to have to, see, I've already cut that loose. That comes on, like I say, that from original is welded. You can see that little bit of discoloration and that little score there. That's from me coming in with the lathe and cutting that weld off that was securing it to the shaft. You see that's a smooth bore, and that's smooth. Doesn't have a key like the coupler on the other end. So you can see got a little bit of work ahead of me here. Need to bore that out to that size, so then I can get that back on there. Of course, this bearing here, it's stuck because I'm filming. That'll come off. You'll have to take my word for it. I'm just going to drill it out first. Get it big enough where I can get a boring bar in there and finish up the bore. And see if we can destroy it. If anybody can, I can. Well, we're getting close. Got a little more polishing to do, but it starts. A little more polishing, and I think it will go. There. Goes on. There's a little burr in here that's gonna have to be cleaned up, but goes right in. That's about where it needs to live. Just basically mimicked where the sprocket rides. Maybe someday I'll learn how to speak. I just put a straight edge from that shaft up and lined up the sprocket. So that should live fine. I'll have some adjustment like this on the lock collars of the bearings anyway. It's not that critical. And I'll also be able to adjust it on this end here, because where the shaft comes through for the upper sprocket to ride, the sprocket can come in and out on this shaft a little bit to match wherever this ends up. Got that welded on and I turned it off so you wouldn't make fun of my welds. Ooh, a bad spot. I don't think it's gonna matter. There, it's all back together. Put a 45 grease fitting in there so I can get grease into it without it being buried behind this. Everything is Loctited together. If you don't Loctite these, they like to loosen up and everything walks around. That's Loctited. Everything spins freely. I Loctited the nuts as well. There's no room for lock washers in there. In the threads I had left in the bolts, so I just put red Loctite in those, blue Loctite on them. That should keep everything moving. From moving, that is. Don't think I showed the damage on the big sprocket. You can see where it chewed all the teeth off that. That's what happens when that walked down onto the small sprocket. Took all those teeth, all of them. We've got the lock collar put on. Obviously never seizes your friend. If you don't take these things apart on like an annual basis, they don't like to come apart. So whenever you do, make sure you clean up the shaft with some emery paper. No rust. Make sure you put plenty of never seize on there. And that's at a eccentric locking collar again. And I have a stock bearing here. I'll put this down so I can have both hands. So we'll say this is your shaft here. See how it goes in and out easily. Not eccentric. If you turn it, that offsets that, and you see that won't come out. I'm sure I can pull it. Nope, I guess not. So you can see you can't even pull that now. And that's the purpose of that eccentric locking collar. Now I've jammed it so it won't come off with my hands. But that's your point of that right there. So that locks, keeps that shaft from spinning inside the bearing. It basically just side loads it. So it can't spin. Keeps everything happy. Obviously you have to make a custom chain here. So I've got it just kind of setting in place, get everything setting on the sprocket. Mark the length we need to break. Got a whole bag of chain. You can get this chain 10 feet for half what you can pay from Kubota for a factory length chain. This is a factory length Kubota chain. So if you go to Kubota and get a chain for this, this is what you're gonna get. You can see the links on it. I don't know if you can read that or not. Has an O in it. 40 RO. Just means it has an O-ring in every link. Keeps some of the dust out. This isn't really a dusty application, so I just bought some heavy duty 40 without the O-ring. You're supposed to oil it every 4 hours anyway, so if you keep it oiled, I don't think you need the expensive O-ring dust chain. So just mark it. Obviously you want to start in the upper part of your adjustment hole. For your reduction box, as the chain stretches, you want to be able to loosen that and force that down to keep your chain tight so that ain't slapping around. Got the chain cut here, master link. And yes, I put the lock on there right for the rotation. Not sure if I put that on backwards, somebody would say that I did it wrong. You want to make sure you bolt that in place first, get it where it wants to be with the correct tension on it. And then you want to make sure that this is in the right location so your chain is riding true in the lower sprocket. And of course, the set screws here, there's two of them. They're buried in behind there, but Loctite them. These things are noted for walking around when you're snow blowing. If this set screws that hold this on the shaft get loose, this will walk around and it can put the chain in a bind and blow it up. You don't want that. On these holes, that goes with all of them. I did it with those two. Everything that you Loctite, that goes for anything you Loctite. You gotta clean that grease out of here. So you just take a Q-tip, put some solvent on it, clean the grease out of there. Obviously, clean the grease off from that. On something like this, because I know they move around, I use red. You can always put a little heat here to break that if you need to get it off. I'd rather have it stay put than walk around and blow the chain up. Now on the bearings, I use blue for obvious reasons. You don't want heat. Put heat on that, get into your bearing and screw that up. And the same thing with that eccentric in there. I put the blue Loctite to that. After you clean it all up, the grease just keeps that from doing what it's supposed to. And cold temperatures don't help either. I'm going to take a little heat gun, probably an air gun. Just warm this up so it's warm. Give it a chance for that to start to kick. One other modification that I made, which is not new, I know some people have done that, but I've done this on snow plows for years. If you have to plow and it's soft, put a pipe cutting edge on. Doesn't solve the problem of picking everything up, but it does help. I've got a lot of loose aggregate, and that does help. Extended the sides out with some rubber to keep it in from tapering out onto the sides there. It's just in place of the shoes, so I run no shoes. Just an old axle that I welded to the cutting edge. I've used it probably 2 or 3 seasons. When it wears down, I just take it off and put some weld on the bottom of it and bolt it back on. Just kind of build it up as I wear it down. And I had another video showing this operate too, but this is just an electric chute rotator that I made. That is a chrome exhaust tip that I just housed the motor in, just something to keep it out of the weather. Just built some brackets to it, welded to it. Top, I think, is part of an aluminum sign, I believe, an old aluminum street sign. Just drilled a hole in it. I can take that off and service the electric motor that's in here. I believe it was a aftermarket electric seat motor. And then I just, I had to make, you know, custom bushings in the lathe to attach it to the original screw mechanism. So this is what comes on them. This is hooked to your hand crank, and that's the end of that there. From here back is all custom. I had to turn a bushing and make that adapt. So that's an upgrade I did. And as well as that, it's just a 12-volt electric actuator. So I can control it from the cab. I didn't have a cab on the tractor originally, and I didn't mind using the hand crank, but after the cab's on it, can't do that anymore.